take a moment to slow down. Wherever you are right now, you are safe in God's presence. Saint Jude Thaddeus, today we come carrying fear. Not fear we chose, but fear that arrived without warning. Fear that lingers even when we try to be brave. Some fears are loud. They interrupt our thoughts. They tighten our chest. They demand attention. Other fears are quiet. They sit beneath the surface. They shape our choices without us realizing it. Saint Jude, you understand fear that tests faith. Fear that asks, what if? Fear that asks, what comes next? Fear that wonders if trusting God will cost us too much. Today, we do not pretend we are fearless. We come honest about what scares us, the uncertainty we cannot control, the outcomes we cannot predict, the future we cannot see clearly. Saint Jude, fear has a way of narrowing our world. It shrinks possibilities. It limits movement. It convinces us to stay where we are, even when growth calls. Sit with us in this fear. Do not dismiss it. Do not shame us for it. Help us face it with gentleness. Saint Jude, we bring you our fear of making mistakes, fear of choosing wrong, fear of missing our chance, fear of regretting decisions we have not yet made. We bring you our fear of loss, loss of stability, loss of relationships, loss of what feels familiar. We bring you our fear of vulnerability, fear of hoping again, fear of trusting others, fear of opening our hearts after disappointment. Hold these fears with us, not as weaknesses, but as places where faith is invited to grow. Saint Jude, teach us that faith does not eliminate fear. Faith walks with it. Faith chooses trust even when fear remains. Faith moves forward without guarantees. Help us understand that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to trust God despite it. Saint Jude. Fear often speaks in absolutes. It tells us everything will fall apart. It tells us we are not ready. It tells us we should wait until we feel certain. Quiet these voices. Help us hear God's steady presence beneath the noise. Help us distinguish between caution and fear, between wisdom and avoidance. Saint Jude, we ask for clarity, not perfect certainty, not complete assurance, but enough light for the next step, enough peace to move forward, enough trust to say yes when fear urges no. Saint Jude, there are moments fear paralyzes us, moments we delay what we know we are called to do, moments we choose comfort over growth, moments we choose safety over faith. Meet us in these moments. Do not condemn us. Gently invite us to trust again. Saint Jude, help us remember times God has carried us, moments we were afraid and survived, moments we stepped forward and found grace waiting, moments we trusted and were not abandoned. Let memory strengthen us. Let it remind us that fear does not get the final word. Saint Jude, teach us to pray when fear rises. Not prayers of control, not prayers of escape, but prayers of surrender. Surrender of outcomes, surrender of timelines, surrender of the need to feel safe all the time. We ask for faith that expands us, faith that opens doors, faith that loosens fear's grip, faith that allows us to step into uncertainty with trust. Saint Jude, walk with us as we face what scares us. Not ahead of us, not behind us, but beside us. We remain here, aware of fear, choosing faith, still trusting that God is near. Saint Jude Thaddeus, we continue into the places fear still touches. Fear that returns after we thought we had let it go. Fear that resurfaces in quiet moments. Fear that appears when we are tired. Saint Jude, fear often disguises itself. Sometimes it sounds like logic. Sometimes it sounds like responsibility. Sometimes it sounds like wisdom. Help us recognize when fear is guiding us instead of faith. Help us pause before it decides for us. Help us listen for God's steadier voice. Saint Jude, we bring you our fear of the unknown, the future without guarantees, the outcomes we cannot predict, the paths that require trust instead of control. We are afraid of stepping forward without certainty, afraid of committing before we feel ready, afraid of trusting God more than our own plans. Sit with us in this uncertainty. Do not rush us. Do not pressure us. Help us trust that God meets us one step at a time. Saint Jude, fear often isolates. It convinces us we are alone in our struggle. It tells us no one would understand. It urges us to keep quiet. Break this isolation. Remind us that others walk similar paths, that fear is shared, that faith is communal. Saint Jude, we bring you our fear of change, change that disrupts what feels stable, change that demands growth, change that asks us to release what is familiar. Help us trust that change can be guided, that not all change leads to loss, that sometimes change leads us closer to who we are becoming. Saint Jude, we ask for courage that unfolds slowly, courage that builds through small choices, courage that strengthens through practice, courage that grows each time we trust God a little more. Help us take the next right step, not the whole journey, not the final outcome, just the step before us now. Saint Jude, fear often magnifies risk. It exaggerates danger. It minimizes grace. It forgets God's faithfulness. Restore balance. Help us see clearly. Help us remember that God has sustained us before, that God remains faithful still. Saint Jude, there are moments fear tempts us to retreat, to return to what feels safe, to abandon what once inspired us. Hold us steady in these moments. Remind us why we began. Remind us what God placed in our hearts. Remind us that calling often feels risky. Saint Jude, we bring you our fear of failure, fear of disappointing others, fear of disappointing ourselves, fear that mistakes will define us. Help us trust that failure is not final, that missteps are not disqualifying, that God's grace meets us even when we stumble. Saint Jude, teach us resilience, not stubborn resistance, but flexible trust. Trust that adjusts, trust that learns, trust that continues despite setbacks. Help us reframe fear as an invitation to rely on God, an invitation to deepen faith, an invitation to grow beyond comfort. Saint Jude, when fear speaks urgently, slow us down. When fear demands control, help us release it. When fear narrows our vision, widen it with hope. Saint Jude, walk with us as we practice faith, as we choose trust again and again. As we step forward without certainty, we remain here, aware of fear, learning courage, still choosing faith. Saint Jude Thaddeus, we move deeper into this practice of faith. Faith that is chosen again and again. Faith that does not rush fear away. Faith that learns how to stand beside it. Saint Jude, fear often asks us to protect ourselves, to build walls, to avoid risk, to stay small. But faith invites us to remain open, to trust God with what feels exposed, to believe that protection can coexist with surrender. Help us hold both. Saint Jude, we bring you the fear of being seen, fear of being fully known, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being judged for who we truly are. Help us trust that God sees us completely and still loves us. Help us believe that we do not have to hide to be safe. Saint Jude, fear sometimes convinces us to delay obedience, to wait until conditions feel perfect, to postpone trust until certainty arrives. But faith asks us to move before everything is clear. Help us respond to faith's invitation, not recklessly, but faithfully. Saint Jude, we ask for discernment. Discernment between caution and fear. Discernment between wisdom and avoidance. Discernment between God's timing and our hesitation. Quiet the noise that confuses us. Sharpen our awareness of God's leading. Saint Jude, fear often distorts perspective. It makes problems feel larger. It makes grace feel smaller. It makes the future feel threatening. Restore balance to our vision. Help us see what is real. Help us trust that God's strength outweighs our fear. Saint Jude, we bring you our fear of disappointing God. Fear that we are not faithful enough. Fear that we hesitate too much. Fear that our fear itself is a failure. Release us from this pressure. Remind us that God's love is not fragile, that God's patience is not limited, that God meets us where we are. Saint Jude, teach us to pray when fear rises. Not with panic, not with demands, but with trust. Trust that places outcomes in God's hands. Trust that loosens our grip on control. Trust that allows God to work in unseen ways. Saint Jude, help us act even while afraid. Help us speak even when our voices tremble. Help us choose faith even when fear lingers. Teach us that courage can be quiet, that bravery can be gentle, that trust can be practiced slowly. Saint Jude, we bring you the moments fear returned after we thought it was gone. The setbacks, the second-guessing, the doubts that resurfaced. Meet us here. Do not shame us. Do not withdraw. Stay close. Saint Jude, help us remember that fear does not disqualify us from faith, that doubt does not cancel belief, that uncertainty does not block God's presence. Faith grows in honest soil, and honesty often includes fear. Saint Jude, we ask for steadiness, steadiness of heart, steadiness of mind, steadiness of trust. When fear fluctuates, anchor us. When anxiety rises, ground us. When uncertainty overwhelms, hold us steady. Saint Jude, walk with us as we learn to trust beyond fear. Not once, not perfectly, but daily. Moment by moment, choice by choice. We remain here, still aware of fear, still practicing trust, still choosing faith. Saint Jude Thaddeus, we enter the final stretch of this prayer. Not because fear is gone, not because courage feels complete, but because faith has been practiced here, again and again. Saint Jude, we notice what has shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly. A softening of the chest, a steadier breath, a willingness to trust a little more than before. Help us recognize these small movements. Help us honor what has begun. Saint Jude, fear will return. We know this. It will visit us on tired days, on uncertain mornings, on nights when questions feel louder. When fear returns, remind us what we practiced here. Remind us how to pause, how to breathe, how to choose trust without rushing ourselves. Saint Jude, we bring you the decisions ahead, the conversations we are avoiding, the steps we are afraid to take. Hold these gently. Help us approach them with faith rather than fear. Saint Jude, teach us to listen for God's voice beneath anxiety. Not the voice that pressures, not the voice that threatens, but the voice that invites, the voice that reassures, the voice that says, I am with you. Saint Jude, we ask for courage that lasts beyond this moment, courage we can return to. Courage that grows with practice, courage that steadies us when fear resurfaces. Help us trust that faith beyond fear is not a destination. It is a way of walking, a way of choosing, a way of returning to God again and again. Saint Jude, we place what remains uncertain into God's care. The outcomes we cannot control, the timing we cannot predict, the paths we cannot see clearly. We release the need to feel safe all the time. We release the demand for certainty. We release the belief that fear must disappear before we act. Saint Jude, walk with us forward, into decisions, into change, into trust. Help us remember that God goes before us, that grace waits ahead, that fear does not walk alone. Saint Jude Thaddeus, thank you for staying with us through this prayer, for helping us face fear without being ruled by it, for reminding us that faith can grow even when fear remains. We step away from this prayer not fearless, but faithful, not certain, but trusting, not finished, but willing. Amen.